All right, guys, I'm back to show you the second half of this project. I'm going to hold it up for you here. This is meant to be a vase basket hybrid, and the marks on the sides are supposed to represent weaving. Obviously, it's not very literal, but you get the idea of these vertical ribs and the horizontal marks connecting them. I got a little carried away this morning before I turned on the camera, and I cut away sections of the foot using my wire tool to try to give it the feeling of sitting on little feet. And I'm kind of liking the way that looks. I basically just cut away sections that were along the middle there, and I think it just kind of makes it look more interesting. You can see it's still just sitting on a flat bottom. I never carved it, just cut away some of those feet. So I'm gonna get to the important part, which is showing you how to make a symmetrical basket style handle. And before I cut to a close-up of my hands, let's talk a little bit about proportions. So a lot of times we can use the rule of thirds in pottery, just like we do in photography, which would mean that the handle should probably be a third of the overall height of the form. So I'm going to measure the height of the basket and figure out how to make my over-the-top basket handle end up being, I guess, half as tall as this form. I think that'll give it a nice, pleasing proportion. Obviously, you can go smaller than that, and it would make life easier for loading it into the kiln. But I think a nice, tall handle, but not too tall of a handle, will be just what this form needs to be complete. So I'm going to get a piece of clay and show you how to pull the handle, and then we'll attach it. I've torn off the better part of a pound of clay to make this handle. I want it to be substantial because it needs to feel like, first of all, it's not just made out of a strip of clay. It wants to feel like it's made out of perhaps some kind of basketry material in terms of its thickness, and it should just have the same kind of gravity as the rest of the form. So I'm going to pull this nice big thick handle. So starting with quite a bit of clay, and I can always take some of it off. And then I also want to make sure that I form it really solidly. So I'm going to compress this clay just by sort of slapping it into a coil. I'm going to definitely want the ends to be thicker than the middle. So I'm going to kind of bop it on both ends. And I've set up a little board here on top of my wheel so I can pull it where you can see it with the camera. The nicer I make this plug of clay, the easier it's going to be to produce a nice, pleasing handle. So that's my starting point. It's thicker at the ends. I'm going to roll it a little bit to try to round it out. I'm trying to avoid pressing on the ends though, because I want to leave that ends thicker. So that smoothed out a little bit more than I was able to do just by hand. And then I definitely want this handle to have a thinner profile in cross section when I look at it from the side. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten it down, just smack it down on my wheel head, well, on this board that's sitting on my wheel. It's exciting, knocking things. So this gives it kind of a half round profile. Now the trick with pulling a handle like this is you need to be able to pull it from both ends. And so I've got a dry hand, I've got a dry end, but once I pull this, I'm gonna have to be careful when I turn it around to hold on to it in such a way that I don't lose my grip on it. So I'm planning on losing about a ½ inch off the end of each side. I'm gonna go ahead and set that board out of my way. I'm done with that. And I'm gonna move my bucket up onto my wheel. I'm gonna turn the power off. That's always a good tip. Whenever you put a bucket of water on top of the wheel, don't have the power on. Okay, so I'm holding this. I may have shown you this before, but I always like to get the handle gripped in my hand by putting my hand palm facing downward, and then I curl my fingers back towards my wrist, lay the handle on the side of my index finger, and then curl my thumb around. What that does is it gets the rest of my hand out of the way so that I can grip right up, start pulling right from the top. All right, so we're gonna make sure it's nice and wet. And then we're gonna just start pulling it. And I need about a foot long handle to give me the right proportion. So this is gonna be not too much clay at all. Go ahead and start pulling. The trick is when you're making a handle that's thick at both ends for attachment, you've got to kind of let off the pressure or stop when you get to the bottom. Getting there. Now I turn the handle and work the profile shape that I'm making 180 degrees from each side. I never want to squeeze the 90-degree sides and thicken up those edges, or it'll make the handle look kind of dumpy and thick from the side. And I want it to look really elegant. Now I'm going to go ahead and grip it and flip it so that I have a chance to make it as symmetrical as possible. So now I've got a grip on the end that was being pulled before. And we're getting up to about a foot long. And we're also getting to a point where the cross-sectional area or the thickness of the handle is appropriate. So that's what it looks like from the side. That's the nice wide handle that way. So at this point, what I want to do is just lay this flat on a board and let it get not stiff at all, but let the shine come out of it so that I can handle it without slipping off of it. And then I'll come back and show you how to actually make the attachment. It's kind of fun and it's not as hard as it looks. So we'll get to that in just a moment. All right, so here I am with this handle having dried for just a little while. It's still a little bit tacky, but I think it's gonna be okay for getting it attached. So I'm gonna lay it on this board nice and flat, and I'm gonna show you how I'm gonna go about cutting it. And so I like to use a cheese wire to cut this kind of attachment. So this is just a piece, I've actually modified this. It's just got a piece of fishing line attached to a regular cheese cutter frame. And what I want to do is cut the end so that it forms a concave little scoop that goes toward the handle and then back out so that it will actually wrap around the lip of the basket form. And it gives it a much more secure attachment, and it also gives it a more finished look. It looks the way a basket handle would attach to a form. So basically I'm going to place my wire at the point where I want to make the cut, and I'm going to cut toward the camera and then back away again. Down and in until I get to the fattest point of the handle, and then back out and against the board. So you can see that is the profile that I cut in it. It should match somewhat the profile of the lip. That was the off cut that I was showing. So now I'm going to turn this board around and show you the cut end. I call that a fish mouth. It's a term they use in welding. When you need to weld pipe together, you cut a fish mouth so it grabs around the other pipe that you're attaching it to. So here we go, make another little fish mouth. And I tried to make the same profile. I don't know whether I got it perfect, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, so that's the handle cut. Let's go ahead and use a scratcher tool and roughen up the inside of the cut and add a little bit of glue to the mix. So we're gonna scratch this up, scratch this up. Scratch this. All right, and then I'm gonna bring the pot itself over and show you how I'm gonna scratch that. I've got it sitting on a board. Obviously, this is all easier to do working at a table, but this is how I have my camera set up. So I thought it would just be easier to bring the work to it. I'm going to scratch all the way around from the inside edge to the outside edge on this rim. Adding a little bit of glue as I go. And then I'll turn this around and do the same on the other side, and hopefully that'll give you a little bit better view of how I've scratched that up. All right, so I think we're ready to go ahead and assemble this. It's kind of exciting. You attach one side, and then once you get the one side attached and you're holding it up in the air, we're going to then bring the other side around. So I'm going to grab a hold of the handle, and hopefully you're going to see, I'm going to just place that fish mouth right over the rim and kind of jiggle it and push it down. I'm not going to worry about, blending everything in. I just want to get it attached, and I want the edges of the fish mouth to kind of bottom out on the rim, and that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to just gently allow it to bend and align the opposite fish mouth with the opposite end. And the cool thing is I've made this handle sturdy enough that although it may not be perfectly symmetrical, it's sitting pretty nice, and it's really not going anywhere. It's a nice strong arch shape, so it's happy. And now I can just spend some time with both of my hands free, jiggle pushing and making sure that that handle is making contact everywhere. I don't want to blend it in. I want to leave that seam showing, but I want to make sure that I'm not leaving gaps where there will be sharp edges, because that is not a feature we really like on ceramic pieces, because those sharp edges can be really sharp. I will smooth away the excess scoring. It's always better to score more than you need and smooth back. Turn it around so you can see how that looks, giving it the final little fiddle. Just using the pads of my fingers and the pads of my thumbs to get that all pushed into place. I really like how the excess thickness of the handle is kind of sticking out beyond the rim a little bit. I'll show you sideways. It's kind of an interesting look. Now I just have to decide exactly what kind of a curve I want there to be. I'm going to check it from the side and make sure it's standing straight upright, which it pretty much is. And then I'm going to take a damp finger and kind of work on this profile. And I want it to kind of follow the line of the basket initially, and then we can decide how sharp we want the bend to be. And I think rounded makes sense. This has got a very nice rounded curve, so I'm not gonna, sometimes I get carried away and I want it to be really angular and dramatic, and I'll push this into more of a V, but I'm gonna let this one just be kind of a nice arch, and I'm gonna hold it up so that you can see the proportions. I think I've got the 2/3, 1/3. It might be a little bit tall, but generally I think it's a pretty pleasing proportion, and it's on there, and I'm not really worried about it going anywhere. I'm going to stop messing with it and let it get to leather hard, because that's freshly pulled. I really only was away from the camera for about 5 minutes. I carved a ceramic jack-o'-lantern while I was waiting for some of the shine to come off this handle. But that's it. These are great for serving pieces. You can put them across the rim of a nice bowl. I love them on vases. I know it kind of gets in the way of where you might be putting the flowers, but so often our vases sit there without flowers in them. They need to be beautiful even without a bouquet. And so this almost gives you that vertical extra bit that makes the vase interesting even when it has flowers in it. So thanks for watching that. I hope that you got something out of that technique for pulling a handle that's pulled from both ends and is symmetrical across the middle. This thing is pretty nice and sturdy. It is about 2 fingers wide, and it's less than a finger deep. So it's a nice strappy kind of handle. Have fun with it, and I hope you get some nice results from your basket handle vase.